Bruchim habayim. Welcome everybody to this very special occasion where we have the zchus of hosting the renowned psychologist, psychiatrist and author, Rabbi, Dr. Professor Avraham Twerski, here at Mayanei Hayeshua's Mental Health Center. Since I'm probably the only one here who doesn't have an MD after their name, I'm going to defer immediately to Professor Strauss, the medical director of our mental health center here, who will give some introduction to our guest speaker. Professor Strauss, please.
A few years ago, the International Medical Oath was rewritten, and they added 3 clauses to the International Medical Oath for all doctors, but healthcare providers, advice for healthcare providers. And one of the 3 things that they added was that it's an ethical duty of those in the medical profession, in the caring profession, to share their knowledge with the community. Not only is it advice, a good thing to do, a ma'aseh tov, it's an ethical prerogative of the profession. And I know of no one in the general psychiatry community, and even more so in the frum community, who's done that more than Rabbi Dr. Avraham Twerski. And we're incredibly privileged today, as part of our monthly lectures, to have Rabbi Dr. Twerski to be with us today. Just as some background, Dr. Twerski was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He became a Rav. He received smicha in 1951, if I'm correct. He went to medical school after that and graduated in 1960. His medical career is profound and has a name as one of the experts in addiction psychiatry, and is well known in conferences in the general circles, and nothing to do with the frum community, obviously. I mean, I knew of him already when I was doing my residency, and I had no idea that he was in the frum community early on. He was the head of the Gateway Rehabilitation Center in Pittsburgh. We served as a medical director, now emeritus, clinical director of the Department of Psychiatry at St. Francis in Pittsburgh, founder of the Sharai Tikva Rehab Center for Prisoners here in Israel. As I mentioned, his clinical career has specialized in addiction, but most of what he's written about, and let me just say this, he's written 60 books, approximately 60 books, or between close to 60 books, 83 books? Oh, wow. Okay. Now, I don't know how many people have actually read 83 books in their lives, okay? But Dr. Twerski has written 83 books, which is profound. I know that he very modestly, I heard him once say that he's written many books, but that's really around one concept or one message. I've read many of them, and I don't think that's true. But perhaps we can hear more of that soon. One of the strengths, and maybe we'll talk about this, is the issue of 12 steps. In the program there, that a lot of that comes from arachim and values that come from Torah. And just on a academic basis for many of the students and the residents we have here, psychology and psychiatry residents, the concept of using psychoanalysis for personal growth has limitations. And we know that we all want to understand the origins of one's behavior and how to use that. But part of the 12-step program is not just looking at who you are and where you're coming from, but also to look at actually doing a transformation of your behavior in a more of an active, supportive manner. And that's a lot of what Dr. Twerski has focused on in many of his readings. As a teenager, I read one of the books, Let Us Make Man, and I can say that it very much changed a lot of my life and my direction, and very well possibly pointed me in the direction of psychiatry. So for me to have Dr. Twerski, Rabbi Twerski here today is something very special for me. What's special here, extra, is that not only is it taking the world of psychology and making that something very worthwhile and important in a person's life, but also with the background of biochemistry, and the background of the knowledge of a doctor, and inculcating the two. Whereas so much we are polarized in various areas. Just let me mention that just a few of the names of the books that he's written, in addition to a very, very rich academic and educational life around him, including his 4 children. Addictive thinking, academics, but what about Angels Don't Leave Footprints, discovering what's right with yourself, coping with stress, the 9/11 generation, Dear Rabbi, Dear Doctor, answers to tough questions, Dearer Than Life, making your life more meaningful. How often do psychiatrists and psychologists sit down with their patients and talk about making your life more meaningful rather than, so let's talk about your anxiety, but how about let's make your life more meaningful? That's a rare thing, and that's something that's very inspirational. Effective living, an upbeat and uplifting life can be yours. The enemy within, confronting your challenges in the 21st century. Forgiveness, don't let resentment keep you captive, and on and on and on and on. One central message that I think that Rabbi Dr. Twerski can give us in our profession is that, and I believe that I even heard him speak about this once, that we live in a generation that's deprived of inspiration. As we come into our middle age, how often, when you're young and you're teenage in your early 20s, you get inspired by sometimes rabbanim, sometimes teachers, sometimes even friends. But as you get older and you get into our generation, how often do we really feel inspired by anything or anyone? That's not a common thing, and we like to believe that it could be our gods, it could be our sports, but that's a rare thing. And I think if people would take the opportunity to read some of the books, even in our generation, I think you'll find them very inspirational, and I highly encourage it. I don't know how many have been translated into Hebrew, but if they are, I would highly encourage people to read. And I'll just end off with just one last statement. We know that Viktor Frankl's principle of, in life, it's not what happens to you, but how you deal with it is something very prominent. That we take whatever's given to us and we have to make something special in the short time we have. And that has obviously theological basis around it as well. But I'm talking more in a professional way. We are all very, very fortunate to have trained in mental health care provision. And it's something that we are very privileged to do. And to come to work every day and to say just a job, just like it is to do everything else. It's every job is important, but there's something that we have very, very special that we can use. We have the tools, and to come to work every day and to make something very, very special of that is something which is an unbelievable privilege that we have. And I think that here we have an example of someone who was a Rav, but he decided to go into medicine, and within his medicine he decided to do psychiatry and to go and to help people in a profession that, people put on the side. People, the mentally ill don't have a voice. We don't really, and here he devoted his life to inspiring people in the area, and most of it is around self-esteem, which is why we requested Rabbi Dr. Twerski to talk to us about self-esteem, and to use that opportunity and the skills and the tools that we have in our profession, not just to come to work and just to do a job, but to do something special. And I really believe that here in Mayanei Hayeshua, in the mental health department that we developed over the last 3 years, not only just the concept of the facilities, very much respecting people and not just making it as, some hospital outside with overcrowded and no facilities and conditions that I feel comfortable coming from Africa with. Here we say no. Patients with mentally ill have a voice. Patients with mentally ill deserve the dignity and deserve us to inspire and to give to them in the area of mental health, including self-esteem. Rabbi Dr. Twerski.
Thank you so much, Dr. Strauss. I must share with you my first impression. Going back to a memory, in 1965 I took the position of director of St. Francis Hospital, Department of Psychiatry, the 300-bed unit, and it had a large alcoholism detox unit. And what we had was alcoholics, coming in, and there was a revolving door. Right? They come in, they would stay a few days, get dried out, leave, and a few weeks back, later they'd be back. And I said, no, this is not good. We have to provide something for them to at least have a beginning of sobriety. And we need a rehabilitation program. So I got some support from the community, some interesting people, and began looking for buildings that we could use, but we couldn't find anything. And finally I decided we're not going to use a building that was used for something else. We're going to start from the ground up, from the first made, to build a unit for treatment of addiction. It was the first rehab in the United States that was built from the ground up to treat alcoholics and drug addicts. And that's a powerful message, because we're telling them you are not second-class citizens. You deserve the best. And Gateway Rehabilitation Center has continued to grow, and it's now over 40 years. Just the other day I got a call from a gentleman who I took out of jail in 1973, right? And he just celebrated his 46th year of sobriety. Right? But the powerful message that it's given is, you deserve the best. Right? And when I came here and I saw the wonderful, the exquisite facility, that is a message to the community that people with psychological, mental problems deserve the best. Right? And that is a indelible message that will make its way to the minds and hearts of people. Okay, so Dr. Strauss said that I'll be talking a little bit about self-esteem. I came across a book, Building Self-Esteem in Children, and the author says, if you've given your children self-esteem, you've given them everything. If you haven't, then no matter what else you've given them is nothing. And I met her once and I said to her, you're making one serious mistake. Parents cannot give their children self-esteem. They can provide an environment where the child can develop self-esteem, but you can't give it to them. As I began my practice, I recognized more and more that every person that I was seeing, whether it was a depressive, a neurosis, addiction, they all had an image of themselves that was terrible. These were people who were feeling worthless about themselves. And you wonder, well, why does anybody develop such a terrible, low self-esteem? And the usual theory is, well, it depends what happened to them in childhood. They had bad parenting, they had poverty circumstances, had a trauma. The only thing that was wrong with that is I looked at myself. My self-esteem was in the basement. I had none. Everybody was better than me. I had a baseball bat, it wasn't as good as anybody else's. I had a baseball glove, it wasn't as good as anybody else's. When I got into medical school, my microscope was not as good as anybody else's. I began thinking, but why? I had wonderful parents. I lacked for nothing. I did not have any trauma in childhood. Why did I develop this low self-esteem? And it remained a mystery for a long time. And of course, what I was trying to do as a psychiatrist is to help elevate a person's sense of worthiness. You get up in the morning and say, that we each have a neshama which is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. certainly a person who is a descendant of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov has no right to have feelings of unworthiness. And yet, I had it, others had it, and it was very difficult to overcome. But the feeling of unworthiness is terribly painful. And the person himself may not be aware that he has a feeling of unworthiness. But it's so painful that he seeks defenses to protect himself from that pain. And this is one of the great contributions that Sigmund Freud and Anna Freud made about the defense mechanisms that a person uses to escape feelings of pain of any kind. You know, you think that if a person is a egomaniac, right, and he thinks he's grandiose, and you think, oh, he certainly doesn't have any self-esteem. So let me just read you 2 lines written about 900 years ago by Rabbeinu Yonah, the greatest of the greats. Rabbeinu Yonah says, Ki be'emes hagaiva eina ela machamat chisaron shemargeshet hanefesh ba'atzma. Gaiva, or grandiosity, is only because the person feels unworthy. Even though he can't express it, because the neshama comes from Hashem, it feels its lack. And the Bal Hagaiva thinks, to compensate for his deficit, he defends himself against his feeling of unworthiness by saying, I'm better than everybody else. You know? Now, generally we would not think that a Bal Gaiva is suffering from self-esteem. Right? And when Yonah says, his Gaiva is a cover-up. He's protecting himself from feelings of worthlessness. Now, it's extremely important as psychiatrists, as Rabbanim, as people who try to help, to realize that we're not dealing with the secular concept of Homo sapiens. You know what the scientific world says? A human being is a Homo sapiens. Well, I can't tolerate that because a Homo sapiens means he's a gorilla with intelligence. And I don't think of myself as a gorilla with intelligence. Right? I think of myself as a person who's on a neshama from Hashem. In 1962, I visited the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he asked me what I was doing. At that time I was in the middle of my residential training, and he said, be sure to read the books by Dr. Viktor Frankl. And I came back, I told my professor at the Institute what the Rebbe said, and he said, Viktor Frankl, he's crazy. And I got the books and I read them, and I realized Frankl wasn't crazy. Frankl realized what all the other psychologists and all the other Freudians included, what they missed. They missed the fact that a human being has a spirit. He's not just a bunch of instincts, but he has a spirit, and unless he gives a meaning to his life, right, he's lost. And that's something that the other psychiatrists did not want to hear. They still wanted to hide behind the Oedipal complex and other such things. Right? And I'm very familiar with, Baruch Hashem, I'm very familiar with them. I had a classical psychoanalytic training. I met with some of the greats in psychiatry. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the names. Met with Eric Erickson. I met with the managers. And they were all wonderful people and all trying hard, but they were missing the point. They're missing the point that Fred never got. He said, no, Frankl was not crazy. Frankl was saying, in addition to everything else, life has to have meaning. And life without meaning is not a life. It's not a human life, it's an animal life. Okay? And so there's a human spirit. Now when you start talking about spirituality, people come back at you and they say, but we're not interested in religion. I said, I haven't talked about religion. I'm talking about spirituality. I'm talking about spirit. Well, what is the spirit if it's not religion? I said, let me tell you what the spirit is. The spirit is that part of the human being which sets him separate from animals. For example, a human being can think about having a purpose in life. Do you know of any animals that have a purpose in life? A human being has the ability to be humble. Right? A human has the ability to choose. You know, animals can't choose anything. Animals are driven by their instincts. Right? The human being can be a bocher, he can choose. The human being has the ability to be patient. Animals can't do that. A human has the ability to make the most out of circumstances. He has the ability to improve oneself. He has the ability to be compassionate. Not only to people he knows, but we do tzedakah and chesed to the hundreds of people who we have never met and never will meet. The ability to self-sacrifice, to give of oneself, one's person, or one's belongings. The ability to have a perspective in life. The ability to be self-aware, to be aware of oneself. The ability to search for the truth. The ability to change oneself volitionally. The ability to forgive. Animals do not forgive. The ability to control one's anger. Animals don't know how to do that. The ability to accept responsibility for one's behavior. These are all items that do not necessarily belong exclusively to religion. A person may be an atheist, may not be religious at all, but these are parts of a human being. And if a human being does not have the spirit, he's deficient. And if he's deficient, he can't be happy. He can't function well. So, the question that you might ask, well, all right, this is fine. All this is spirit. And if a person does all of these things, yes, he is spiritual. Right? Where does religion fit in? I said, very simple. One of the things of spirituality is to live with a purpose. Right? Now, you know, there's a theory that the world was not created by God. It happened billions of years ago. There was a freakish accident, and atoms were formed, and molecules were formed. Right? And over billions and billions of years, it evolved into the world as we know it. So what was the purpose of the world? There was no purpose. It was an accident. It wasn't an accident. You mean there's no purpose to the world at all? No, it just happened. It didn't have to happen. You know something? I can't have a meaningful purpose in my life if the whole world is without a purpose. So where religion comes into spirituality, is that if there is no purpose to the creation, no purpose to my existence. And that's not a good feeling. Incidentally, I do want to mention something else. It's a little off on the side. I recall in my second year of medical school, my professor of pathology said to me, "Twerski, what do you plan to do after medical school?" I said, "I'm thinking of going into psychiatry." Good, good. Listen to what they tell you and give the information back to them on the board exams. And then forget it all and use your head. I didn't quite do that, but came pretty close. I didn't want to forget it all because there's certainly many good things that I learned from psychiatry and from psychology. But ultimately, Baruch Hashem, I tried to use my head. And so the mystery remained, though. Why was it that I, who had such a wonderful upbringing, such a warm home, and then the sun setting, rose and setting set over me, how did I develop low self-esteem? And how can I help other people overcome their low self-esteem? Because if you don't have a good feeling of worthiness, right, it causes not only depression, it causes dysfunction. Right? It causes the relationships between family, parents and children, husband and wife. There has to be a feeling of worthiness that we can try to give them. And so perhaps for the first 60 years of my life, I was walking around like a time bomb with feelings of inadequacy, feelings that I'm not as good as anybody else. And I did some mishugana things in order to feel better about myself. Let me just give you one little example. It was so important to me that I get approved by everybody. There are 4 billion people in the world. I need 4 billion people to approve of me. And chas v'shalom, if anybody looks at me the wrong way, I was disaster. I used to give droshes on Shabbos. After the drosha, people came over and shook my hand. "Rabbi, that was wonderful." If they didn't do that, I would go crazy. I had to be constantly reminded how good I am. Why? To make up for this feeling of no goodness. So let's tell you what kind of Michigan things a person can do if he feels that he's not good enough. One Thursday, a woman came in. Her husband was one of the prominent members of our shul, and she came in crying. Her brother had been taken to the hospital with chest pain. I lived 10 minutes from the hospital by car. So I jumped into the car and went to the hospital. I met with the doctors, and they said, "Yeah, he has some chest pain, but it does not look like it's a heart attack. But we'll keep him over the weekend for observation." Okay. Friday morning, I went back to see him. He was fine. Shabbos, this was during the Thanksgiving week, I remember clearly, end of November, there was a cold rain, and I walked from my house for 4 miles to Mayanei Hospital to see Frank. Why? Because I wanted to be mitzvah b'kechayim. I would have waited 4 hours. I could have been there by the car. What did I do that for? Why did I walk in the cold rain for 4 miles? Mishigas. Ultimately, it was a job undone. It was not done good enough. And I do not know why. Why are so many people feeling unworthiness? And especially people who achieved a great deal. Professors, PhDs, CEOs, important people, wealthy people, and we all have feelings of unworthiness. Where from? And then I came across this phrase, united in San Francisco, Mayanei Hayeshua. And San Francisco says, focuses on the focus of the heaven that we see in our the cause of Satan Yurim Kol. Hashem Azarani. The title to be translated, the cause of Satan Yurim Kol. Push, I was pushed to fall, but Hashem helped me. And he said these very simple words. He says, the fall is not a verb. It's a noun, the Hashem verb. He says, it would seem that the thought of Satan is a repetition. The thought of Kafu. Dafo is not a verb, it's a noun. Dafo is a Shem Dafo. And what does it refer to? Shifut ha'adam ha'mutrov v'telo. Udocha oso tamid asher oso ha'afil ha'aseh. So the person's feeling of loneliness, which is part of his nature. It doesn't come because I had trauma as a child. It doesn't come because I had abusive parents. It comes because there's part of me, that's part of my nature, that wants to crush me. That can only be the Yitzhak. It's the only power that will do it. So one time the Yitzhak goes to go to us, go to another, go eat trade, do the House Shabbos or whatever. Here the Yitzhak is a master stroke. He doesn't necessarily tell you to do anything else. He just tells you you're no good. You're no good, right? And what happens is, you will leave him. If he tells you go eat on Yom Kippur, you say no. But if he tells you you're really worthless, you will leave him. And I think that in order to overcome low self-esteem, we have to realize where it's coming from. I don't listen to the Yitzhak when he tells me that he never gives it. And I don't listen to the Yitzhak when he tells me that I'm worthy. Because I know what he's trying to do. And that's a fantastic observation for those synthesis. And I think that if we would realize, I don't believe that the psychiatrists and psychologists have to preach Musa, it's not their job. But you ought to realize where the person may be coming from. He may be hit by the Yitzhak, and he may be a PhD, he may be multiply degreed, he may be a CEO, he may be very wealthy. The Yitzhak will hit him hard. In fact, the Yitzhak will hit him harder than somebody who's less well talented. And that's the paradox of self-esteem. The paradox of self-esteem is that people who are most qualified have the worst feelings of low self-esteem. Why? Because how powerfully it's a Yitzhak is Hashem going to give you? Well, it depends how much power you have to resist it. If you don't have many assets, Hashem is not going to overwhelm you with the Yitzhak. That will crush you completely. But if you've got assets and you've got personality and you've got intelligence, then Hashem will give you Yitzhak because you have the means to battle with it. So people who are highly qualified, are likely to have a worse self-esteem. I once invited a specialist to address the medical society in Pittsburgh. This is a doctor who's written a book on the disease. And he lectured to the medical staff, and I could see what he was doing. He was looking over the audience, right, to see if Chas v'Shalom somebody was disapproving of what he said. And I thought, why do you care if anybody disapproves? You're the author, right? You're the authority. If anybody disagrees with you, they're wrong. Later on, when I took him to the plane to go back home, right, I sat with him for an hour waiting for the plane. You've never seen a person with such feelings of lowliness and worthlessness as this doctor. Right? And that's just an example that as great as a person is, right, has the paradox he might have terrible feelings of low self-esteem. So, the question is, we talked about spirituality, we didn't say anything about religion. But where religion comes in is Shabbos. On Shabbat we know that Hashem created the world. And He created the world because the world has a purpose. And if the world does not have a purpose, then I don't have a purpose. You know the story about, there were two men who were arrested for vagrancy, for loitering, and they were brought before the judge. The judge asked the first guy, what were you doing when the officer arrested you? He says, nothing. And he asked the second guy, what were you doing when the officer arrested you? He says, I was helping him. Huh? Yeah. If you're helping somebody who's doing nothing, then you're not doing much yourself. Right? So someplace there has to be something that has value. Right? And then everything else in turn can have value if we're supportive of it. So, I do think that in mental health, we don't have to preach religion, we don't have to ask anybody, right, whether they put on 2 parrots film every day. What we do have to do is help the person realize that there has to be some meaning to his life other than getting up in the morning and going to the office. I mean, it's wonderful to do a day's work, right? But that doesn't give meaning to life. Now, the whole world is awash with meaning. What kind? Eating, sleeping, having a good time. But that's not it. And this is where Victor Frankl was so right. That there must be some meaning to life. And without meaning there can't be structure, there can't be function, there can't be happiness. Now the question is that somebody says, okay, if parents are going to try and give their children self-esteem and tell them how wonderful they are. Right? And when he comes home with a paper with 78, they say, wonderful. And puts it on a refrigerator. If we treat our kids that way, aren't they going to grow up to be spoiled brats? Right? The answer is there's a way to raise children without hurting their self-esteem. My father's if he saw that I did something that he didn't approve of, he used to say, "Spas nisfadir." You know, it doesn't suit you. Why are you doing something that's beneath your dignity? He didn't tell me I was bad. Right? Then there's the famous story on Rosh Hashanah. I was 9 years old, maybe, and I was a good chess player. I used to beat all the old men in shul. Right? And we had a visiting rabbi from Chicago. And in the afternoon he had said to me, "Want to play chess?" I said, "Rosh Hashanah, it's Yom Tov." He said, "So, why can't you play chess on Yom Tov?" Okay. So I played him, and I beat him twice. Right? Second night of Yom Tov, the shamus comes over to me and he says, the Rebbe wants to see you in his study. The Rebbe wants to see you in his study. Okay. So again, my father was sitting and looking in the sefer, and he let me stand there for a while. And then he looked up at me. "You played chess on Rosh Hashanah?" I said, "Yeah, the rabbi said you're allowed to." My father didn't say a word. Just looked back down in the sefer. I got the message. You're allowed to, technically you're allowed to, like the rabbi said. But I should have known better that Rosh Hashanah is not a day for playing games. Okay, so I got my musa. And now I'm waiting for my father to dismiss me. He has to tell me, "Get your son to the head, you're going to go to hell, so I can leave." So he let me stand there for a few minutes. Then he looked up again and he said, "Did you beat him?" I said, "Yeah, twice. Get your son to the head." He had to tell me what I did was wrong. But I'm not going to leave that room feeling bad about myself. Right? That's the secret of bringing up children. Right? Don't tell them that they're bad. Right? Tell them that they're too good to be doing something improper. Right? I can't resist it. I just got to tell you this, because to me it's so important. You know, I trained from 1960 to 1963 in an Orthodox psychoanalytic Freudian school. Okay? I learned a lot about Freud. He was a brilliant person. He made many mistakes, but he doesn't. In our institute, he was worshipped like an Avodah Zarah. When I came back home to visit, my father told me, "So, what are you learning?" So I'm telling him I'm learning about psychoanalysis. And to treat patients, you have to see him 3-4 times a week. And this can go on for 3-4 years. My father says, "Let me tell you a story." He says, back in Russia, the Pullets had dominion over his fiefdom, right? And he had absolute powers. And there was no central government. Many Politim had pogroms. There was one Pullet who was a pacifist. He did not believe in violence. He did not allow any pogroms. And the Jews had it wonderful by him. And the Goyim couldn't tolerate that while he's not persecuting the Jews. And they looked for ways in which to incite him against the Jews. So finally they found a way. This poet had a pet dog that was his constant companion. So they went over to the poet and they said, Your Excellency, Jews are a very resourceful people. There's things that nobody else knows how to do that they can do. For example, they can teach a dog how to talk. He said, You really? Yeah, but they wouldn't do it for you because you're a goy. He says, my Jews, they'll do anything for me. He says, try it. They'll tell you it can't be done. They'll give you 1,001 excuses. The real person is they won't do it for you because you're a goy. So he called on the community leaders. And he says, look, you know how I've been considerate and I've given you protection. I have one favor to ask of you. My pet dog, that's my constant companion. Now we can communicate in a way, but it's very limited. But if only you could teach him how to talk, that would be for a new life for me. So they said, Your Excellency, ask us to jump off the building for you and we'll do it. Ask us to go into the fire, we'll do it. But don't ask us to do something that's impossible. You can't teach a dog. Oh, because I'm not Jewish, that's why you're not doing it. That's how you repay my kindness to you. Look, he says, I'm not arguing with you. Teach the dog how to talk, or within 30 days I want every Jew out of my fiefdom. What do you do with this Meshuggah? So they go back and they have Tillim and they fast. And they go to the Kabbalah. Nothing's working. And the clock is ticking. And it comes already to the 29th day, and they're already putting all their belongings on the wagons to leave. A little lesser luminary of the community, a little tailor, comes in. He says, Chavre, let me go and talk to the bullets. What are you going to talk to the Meshuggah for? Oh, the Rabbonim can't make any headway with it. What do you got to lose? You're ready to leave anyway. So he goes into the palace. An hour later, he comes out with the dog on a leash. They say to him, what are you doing with that dog? He says, I told the poet I would teach him how to talk. What, are you crazy? I explained to the poets that you have to understand that even a human child is much more intelligent than the dog. But he doesn't talk for the first 2-3 years. Right? It takes about 6 years till he learns how to talk. Right? So I gotta understand that to teach a dog how to talk is going to take a long time, 6-8 years. And so then what's going to be? He said, don't be a fool. Within 6 or 8 years, something's going to happen to get us off the hook. Right? Either the poet will die, or the dog will die, or I will die, and we'll be out of it. So my father tells me, you're going to see a patient for 3 or 4 years, and when he gets better, you're going to say you did it. Right? How many things could have happened during those 3-4 years that would change a person's life? Right? So, I learned some psychiatry some psychology from my father. Almost anything that I could have learned, right? I had a story from my father to demonstrate it. Right? Just one more, and then I'll quit. Okay. A guy came to a city in Russia. Yeah. He got off of the train, and he hired a taxi, which was a horse and wagon, and he tells the driver where he wants to go, but he tells him, but don't go to that particular road because there's a big ditch there. So he says, look, will you sit back and relax? I'm the driver. I've been driving these roads for 35 years. Okay. As they keep on going, he says, look, I see where you're heading. Don't go toward that road. He says, will you sit and relax? I'm driving these roads for 35 years. And of course, they end up going and falling into the ditch with the horse and the wagon on top of them. And the driver says, funny thing, 35 years I'm driving these roads, and every time I come here, I fall in. We call that the repetition compulsion. So, my friends, it's been a wonderful career. I did make some contributions. I tried to share ideas of let us make man, that a human being is more than an animal, and that it has a neshama from Hashem, and gives them the unlimited potential of what to do with his life. I'm very impressed that this facility has a successful eating disorder unit. I'm sure that it has its difficulties, but in America there are many institutes for eating disorders, and their success rates are very, very low. It's a very difficult condition to treat, and I think when I come back, if I do get back to the States, I'll have to spread the word to have some people come here and learn how you treat eating disorders, and get a good result. I think I've about used up my time, right? Okay. All my friends, we're standing before Rosh Hashanah. I want to wish you all a Shana Tova, a K'tiva v'Chema Tova, which Hatzlacha and Achat, and especially children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and have Kol Tuv, and true simchas.
תודה רבה רבה רבה. לפני שנפתח את זה אולי לכמה שאלות, לפני שאני יודע שאנשים מתחילים לצאת כי צריכים לחזור לטיפולים, יש כמה אורחים מכובדים. תודה רבה לרב הוכנר, רב של בית חולים שהגיע גם להצטרף. יש כמה אורחים מכובדים אחרים כמו משפחת קצמן, אבל גם יש גם מטופלים שזה חשוב להגיע ואנחנו מודדים את זה. אני גם רוצה להודות לחיים פחלה שארגן את הכל היום. אוקיי, כן? זה טוב, כמובן. כן, לא, זה בדיוק, ואחרון חביב, אני לא אמרתי את זה בהתחלה, ורציתי גם להודות לדוקטור בסלר, כן, שהגיע גם, אז דוקטור בסלר is a psychotherapist, prominent psychotherapist in a very important area of sexual function, and it's something that we also want to encourage. It's a yichida that we haven't yet developed in our department. It's something that we want to move into, and we're very privileged to also have you today with us today. Thank you. I have a few questions were sent in before, so I'm just going to ask the few questions, and if there's anyone else who wants to add or feel free to at the end. Rav Dr. Twerski, how do you answer the accusation that the self-esteem movement is to blame for showering children with effusive, unconditional praise while sheltering them from any criticism or adverse consequences? So the self-esteem movement.
Right. I think it's a mistake. It's a mistake to think that self-esteem means that you should pamper your child. Right? The child has to be prepared for the real world. The real world is not going to pamper him. Right? And I think children have to be complimented and taught as my father did. And the reason for not doing something is because it's improper, not because you're going to get punished for it. Right? And that's what the idea was. Why are you doing something that's beneath your dignity? You're too good for that, right? And at the same time, he made demands of me. Right? And when I played chess on Rosh Hashanah, he let me know that he's very proud of the fact that I beat the guy twice, but still, it was an improper thing. Rosh Hashanah is not a day for games. And I think that kind of attitude can go through everything that we do. Right? The Gemara says, Yamin, small dot of Yamin, Mikarevas. You reprove or admonish with the left hand, but bring closer with the right hand. Right? So, if it's done properly and it's done with good intentions, right? The only problem is that sometimes parents may not act in their for the child's welfare, but may act for their own welfare. Right? And that's something that you have to be extremely careful about. Once you bring your child into the world, you have lost the right to put yourself first. Right? The child's welfare must come first. And children will feel that. And they'll feel what their parents are doing for themselves or what themselves are doing for the child.
Unfortunately, in our community, our community is not immune to the phenomenon of abuse and post-trauma. And a lot of children, adolescents, and young adults and adults who go through trauma feel a lot of anger and resentment and disillusionment and leave religion. So how do you think that we can help our children and our children who become adults still remain connected to religion from a mental health perspective rather than with their anger and disillusionment leave it? Because we know that there's, for example, the second highest rate of suicide in this country are those who have left ultra-Orthodox Judaism. And it's a group at risk for suicide, for example. But not just for suicide, for many other practices. So how do we deal with this phenomenon of abuse and post-trauma so people don't develop that anger and disillusionment?
The problem of abuse is a serious one, and is one that's been neglected for so long. Particularly spouse abuse. It's a topic that no one wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. And 20 years ago, when I wrote my book about spouse abuse, I started receiving death threats, and I had to, the next few lectures were with police protection. Right? Nobody wanted to hear about is it possible that a frum person can be an abuser? I said, absolutely not. But we know some. I said, he's not frum. Right? If he eats chazer, he's not frum. Right? And if he abused his wife and children, he's not frum. I don't care what he looks like. I don't care what else he does. And so I think that what we need is a community education. We need parental education. We need education for young couples. Not that they assume that they know it all. And I say when they bring a child into the world, they should know that they just lost something. They lost the prerogative to have their way. Right? So I think it can be done, but it's going to take a lot of community education. Okay? And again, the stigma was terrible. It's just begun to lift it a little bit. And you know, my book on spouse abuse, there were some Milchas Forum, some Forum stores that would not carry it. Why? Our rabbi said we're not allowed to carry this. Right? With that kind of attitude, you're not going to have any progress. But Baruch Hashem, that's changing, and it's a slow process. But I think the goal is in sight. that we'll be able to have firm children with, and we have to be very careful about the educational system. Right? There's a lot of wonderful things about the educational system. There's also many faults. Right? Kodesh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to everybody. He gave it to the smartest person and to the weakest person. Right? And when I hear stories about a child not being accepted to a yeshiva, a girl not being accepted to a girls' school because she is not the top 10, that's terrible. Right? And I think we have to have a kind of community revolution to see that educational institutes should give everybody an equal opportunity. Right? No, not everybody is going to become a Chazon Ish. Right? But you don't have to become a Chazon Ish. Right? And I think that if we will teach our kids that we have true love for them and that they'll see a true Shalom Bayis, I think there's a good chance that it can be licked. Okay.
I have lots and lots of questions, but the time is late, and we do have a hard stop in an hour, because it's good to have dessert, but we all need to go back to our work and help our patients. Unless there's any pressing question from anyone? Yeah.
Thank you so much for that very, very enlightening talk. When you spoke about self-esteem, and you speak about good parenting, and good example, and love, and respect for the child, and yet, even so, that child may not have self-esteem. That's where I'm not quite sure how you understand that.
Again, there are things that are important that parents should do for the child's self-esteem. But remember where low self-esteem comes from. Low self-esteem comes from, like the Simple Zissel said, it comes from the fact that a person has a Yetzer Hara that wants to crush him and make him non-functional. And the best way to do that is to make the person feel inadequate. Right? So you're dealing with a powerful Yetzer Hara, and we have to learn how to deal with the Yetzer Hara constructively.
And Milim, I really, really want to thank you for coming, and I know you're busy, and I know that you've given thousands of hours to lectures, and you've inspired many people, and I hope that even in a tiny way that some of us and many more on our link up have been inspired, and as professionals to say that we come to work and help people in the medical field and in the mental health field, not just to do a job, but to, as you mentioned, to give some meaning into people's lives, and that's something very special that we have the tools to be able to do, and let's hope that we can take this message and go back to our clinical rooms and do a lot of good. Thank you so much to both of you for coming and honoring us with your presence. We are deeply, deeply gratified and for the experience and in debt. Thank you so much.
So every Monday you're here now? That's it.